All right, so this is part 2 of the Unit 4 review, and we're going to talk about the fascist here. Mussolini, remember, was a socialist during World War II, and he got kicked out of the party, as I recall, for supporting World War I. He later on does this thing called the March on Rome. I believe it is 1921, 22, it's early 20s. And I made a big deal about it. I think I gave at least one of my classes a DBQ on that. And it's interesting because he had these people called the black shirts. All right, so he's a short guy. He's like 5'1", 5'2", and he's got all these dramatic hand gestures. I usually show pictures of them in class. I did not do this year because, like everything else, I'm behind, but he was very dramatic. He overacted. Some of you are in drama. Shakespearean actors were trained, to act on these stages, and they had to overact so that people way up in the cheap seats could, figure out what's going on. Mussolini's one of those kind of guys. He's very dramatic. And so he had his salute. He had these street thugs called black shirts. And so what he does, he organizes this thing called the March on Rome. And the fascists, the black shirts, just beat the crap out of everybody, going around doing stuff. And so he has a meeting with the king. He's like, this place is out of control. We don't have any law and order here. You ought to put somebody in charge who can get these thugs in line. Obviously, he had himself in mind, and they gave him the job. And so then he just told his own thugs, knock it off. Well, Hitler, who was a real nobody in 21 or 22, remember Hitler is this, ninth grade dropout, wanted to be an artist or an architect, failed at both. He was an itinerant house painter. Lived in he lived in hostels, youth hostels. He was like these guys you see by the side of the road that says we'll work for food. And so he did not have much, of a background, but he was homeless on the streets of Vienna for like 7 or 8 years. And he taught himself, well, he's watching all this stuff. And so remember, he gets out, he goes off to World War I. He's like 28 or 29. He's not 17 or 18. He's older. He goes off in the German army. I don't really have time to do the whole Hitler biography again. Plus, you don't need to know all this stuff, but you could very likely get an essay on Hitler. And so he goes off and becomes this war hero, gets the Iron Cross, and he wants to stay in the army, but as the provisions of the Treaty of Versailles, he has to get out of the army. So he goes around and he finds out he's really good at making speeches. So he joins this tiny party with like 18 to 20 members, and makes it a force. The German National Social German Workers' Party. The National Social German Workers' Party. And he's watching Mussolini over there take over. And something happens. I don't think it's in your book, but somebody tried to take over the government of Bavaria. Pretty sure it was the usual suspects, the commies. So Hitler's like, I better beat him to it. So he organizes this, what we call the beer hall putsch. And Hitler, he saw Mussolini pull off something like this. But Hitler goes to jail, writes his book, Mein Kampf. And so just about everything Hitler does, he patterns after Mussolini. And Mussolini expands the military, and he attempts to take over Ethiopia. And eventually they do beat the Ethiopians. Now, some of you had me for AP World, and you know that earlier on the Ethiopians, had repelled, European invaders. But they are successful here. Now, Mussolini's nickname is Il Duce, which I think means the leader. His motto was, Il Duce is always right. Hitler comes along, he is Der Fuhrer, which is the leader, and his guys are called the Brown Shirts. And the Weimar Republic is the government set up after, the collapse of, I started to say Tsarist Germany, the Kaiser's Germany. And they moved the capital from Berlin over to this city called Weimar. And a lot of people are fascinated with the Weimar Republic. I mean, this is going on while we have the Roaring '20s going on here. And it was really a weak government. A lot of people are fascinated with the culture and, stuff. And if you minor in history in college or you study it, you can take entire classes on the Weimar Republic. He writes his book while he's in prison, Mein Kampf. He says Germany needs Lebensraum, living room. And he actually says out in his book, here's what we need to do. We need to take land away from the Poles and the Ukrainians. This is going to be important later on because when Hitler starts World War II, he does basically everything he said he was going to do in the book. And there's all these theories about, why didn't people read his book? And you may not know this, but years ago, Obama wrote a book. And now, of course, Obama's going to go on to be president of the United States twice. Is a pretty popular president. A lot of people really like him and think he's one of the best presidents we've had in a while. And but when he wrote his first book, there was like 18 people running for president, so nobody read it. And so my professor in college said Hitler was a nobody who just got out of jail. Nobody thought he was ever going to do anything. And his book was very hard to read. Later on, when World War II is over, anywhere from 50 to 90 million people are dead. They go back and read his book. He makes the Jews the scapegoats. Hitler's, when he was young, he was heavily influenced by the anti-Semitic mayor of Vienna named Karl Lueger. And anyway, so Hitler is legally elected. That might show up on the exam. There's a whole bunch of parties vying to take control of Germany. And what's going on is rampant inflation. The French had demanded Germany make its reparation payments, and the Germans couldn't really afford it. And so the French marked their black soldiers, their African soldiers, into the Ruhr. This is this industrial region of Germany. And really, I think, used those soldiers to really piss off the Germans, and it worked. The Germans are like, screw you. You want money? We'll print money. Now, other teachers use different reasons. That's just the way I learned it in college. That's what they did. They printed a bunch of money, which led through hyperinflation. And what that means is, and I can speak on this with some authority now, being as I'm close to retirement, and I'm just going to throw in a modern day political note. I was talking to 2 assistant principals today, and we are all very afraid with all the spending. They're just giving people money right now that by June or July, we're going to have rampant inflation in this country. And what happens is I'm about to retire and I have some money saved up. And what happens is, let's say you have saved up $200,000 or $300,000 for retirement, or $400,000 or $500,000. And that is, going to give you a pretty good retirement. And all of a sudden inflation comes along and that $500,000 is worth like $35,000. And so Hitler comes along during this period of intense inflation, and he has this economic plan, and it works. And I'm not calling Hitler a genius. I actually think he's an idiot. Don't misquote me, but somebody working for him knew what they were doing. And he comes to power about the same time as FDR. And obviously he's very, very successful. And I'm spending way too much time on this. Soviet communism. So Lenin was the Bolshevik leader. Remember Lenin, I don't think I showed you the video on him this year, because the same reason we were behind. Lenin was exiled from Russia. His brother tried to blow up the Tsar and was executed. And Lenin has this real chip on his shoulder about his brother dying. Now, other people, you guys are probably going to get a chance to study Marxism in college and hear people talk about how great it is. You should, never mind, but you're going to hear this. But so Lenin is just this bitter, angry old man living in Switzerland. And then the most wonderful thing happens. World War I, and millions of people are dying. And that is just not my personal opinion. This is what experts on Lenin, the A&E biography that I'm quoting, say. All of a sudden he's excited. He's been a Marxist his whole life, and now there's a chance he can take over. And so he gets on the train. We already talked about this. He goes back. Now, one thing you need to know about Lenin, Marx just basically said one day the workers were going to get so tired of the upper classes abusing them that they were just no one was going to lead them. They were just going to pick up weapons and take over. Lenin does not believe that to be true. He believes the common worker, an ordinary person, the proletariat, is stupid. And you need a professional revolutionary like him. And so here's 3 words you need to write and associate with Lenin: small conspiratorial elite. These people, the common people, are stupid, and we need to lead them. And so he does. We're not going to go over all this again. There's the 2 revolutions in 1917. They take over and they go around taking everybody's land and their food away. War communism. Then he has the new economic policy. That's what I've always heard it called. I actually have seen 2 things recently that called it the new economic plan. Shocking because it uses capitalism. And I'll give you both versions of why he did that. His version was, well, society is supposed to go from feudalism to capitalism, then to socialism. And, World War I and the Civil War has destroyed the economy so bad, we're all the way back to feudalism. We need some capitalism to have money, which brings me to my favorite quote from Margaret Thatcher. You can't, the problem with socialism is you eventually run out of other people's money. So he allows it now. Some historians say the real reason he allowed it is because he was afraid of the kulaks. And that's the word you need to know, K-U-L-A-K. The kulaks, and they're the better off peasants, whatever the heck that means. That's like the most vague definition I've ever heard, but that is the actual definition. And so he's afraid of them. Well, he dies and somebody shoots him, and some woman shoots him. In some ways, it's similar to the guy killed in the bathtub, Marat. And so the thing is, this woman shoots him, and he survives the assassination attempt, but he's never 100% anymore. Then he has several strokes, and he's supposed to have said before he died, he wrote in his wrote an order, don't put Stalin in charge. And everyone thought when Lenin died, Trotsky would be the one to take over. And I'm surprised Trotsky is not mentioned on the right side of this page. He's mentioned on the left. So Lenin dies. There's this huge battle between Stalin and Trotsky. And Stalin was the apparatchik. In other words, he was the party person. He was the paperwork guy. He ran the bureaucracy. And Trotsky is brilliant, and his thing is permanent revolution. Now, you want to write this down. Let's, now that we've got one country, let's keep going. And Stalin has the more practical socialism in one country. And if you hang around Marxists and people like this or read these guys, they say things like, we need to build socialism here. And everyone's involved, they're all interested in it, which of course is not true, but that's the official story. So because Stalin wants to do it in one country first, which does not involve going to war with the whole world, Trotsky's going to have millions more people die. For all these reasons, Stalin wins. And he sets up his first 5-year plan. He says, listen, we're way behind the Western countries. We have to beat them. And this is very successful. Somebody made a comment to me about, did I actually say they were successful? Absolutely. The first one is very successful. I don't know what this Holodomor means. I wonder if this PowerPoint has been hacked. Anyway, it's very successful. His second one was supposed to focus on consumer goods to make the people happy. And it was interrupted by World War II. So no one knows whether or not, if World War II had happened, if Stalin could not have had a successful socialist state. I think you will find out it is not successful. He has the great purges, the show trials, the gulags, the Russian prisons, and they're out in Siberia, and they don't even have fences around them. They put you out in the middle of Siberia, 200 miles through, what's the word? I think the taiga. And, it's 80 degrees below zero. If you escape, they're not going to look for you. You're going to freeze to death. All right, aggression and appeasement. All right, after World War I, you have the League of Nations. Why don't you pause this, write all this stuff down, then I'll race through this stuff. Okay, League of Nations, that was Wilson's idea to have collective security. Remember, the Americans don't join. The problem is it's a victor's peace, which means they decide, the British and the French, specifically the French, that Germany needs to be a loser. And, or they need to be winners. And anytime you have a winner, that means you have a loser, and most losers want revenge. And so here comes the Great Depression and the rise of fascism. Japan, we cannot forget about Japan. Even though they're not Europeans, they are major players in this. They invaded Manchuria. The League of Nations condemned it but didn't do anything. Eventually, they leave the League of Nations. Hitler's also going to leave it as well. And the Japanese occupy Manchuria. They use some railroad incident, the Mukden Railroad incident, as an excuse to attack and occupy. Hitler's going to do something like that. I wish I knew more details on it. In Poland, where they just make up an incident so that it's an excuse for them to attack. And the Japanese begin to imperialize China. Now, some of you in APUSH are watching those Heimler videos, and my AP World kids are watching him. He's got a very unique take on this. He also kind of has this idea that, Japan had to attack us. I don't buy that, because we had cut off sales of scrap metal to them. But we had done that because they invaded China. And it's not evident to us now because China is our number one competitor in the news today. This is Tuesday night, is the G7 meeting trying to come up with a way to deal with China. And also in the news today, an Australian general told his troops that they find war with China in the next few years almost inevitable. Everyone sees China on the rise. So they're kind of our enemy now, or at least our competitor. Hopefully they won't become our enemy. But during the 1930s, China, we liked China. We had assisted them. And when I was a kid, the older people would still say, talk about China and the desire, this is in church, to, convert the Chinese. So Americans had a real soft spot for China. So we're pretty angry at Japan when they invade. Hitler's named chancellor. He solidifies Nazi control. They start passing the Nuremberg laws. They have Kristallnacht. 1935, he starts rearming Germany. And what he does some interesting things. He does some of his rearming in the Soviet Union. Very interesting. I don't think our book mentions that. And so Stalin and him are kind of sympathetic, even though they both dislike each other. The Western powers objected, but they didn't act. All right. Italy gets punished with sanctions for invading Italy. All right, again, pause this. I know this is some interesting stuff. You guys are AP kids. You can write this down quickly. All right, now, this was the essay for Euro 1 year, and it says, discuss diplomatic moves by Hitler prior to World War II. And my kids say what all AP kids say. You never went over this. Well, I went over every bit of it. It's just the way they phrased the question. It did not seem familiar to the students. So 1936, he occupies Rhineland. Now remember, the Rhineland is part of Germany. And it was a buffer zone, and all he did was put his troops into Germany. The British and the French let him get away with it. Now in Spain, we did not spend a lot of time talking about this. The fascists rebel against the Republican government. And Mussolini and Hitler support Franco. And the Republican government is fairly socialist. And what's interesting is the Americans support the socialist elected government against the fascists. And obviously, I would say America does not like fascism. There were many important American leaders. Let me see, I can probably ruin some people's reputations. I believe Henry Ford, maybe Charles Lindbergh. I'm not sure about all these. Pretty sure they said good things about Hitler. And so what happens over there in Spain is the Russians give some of their military equipment to the Republican government. I don't think the Americans do. And the Nazis in black shirts, the Italian fascists, arm Franco. And so it's a testing ground for these weapons. And there's that famous story about Market Day. Oh my gosh. The guy who painted that thing, your art history should get it. Where it was Market Day, and all of a sudden the Italian bombers flew over and bombed Spain and killed all these civilians. And there's a famous painting on it. I don't know why I can't think of it. Senior citizen moment. 1937, they signed the Anti-Comintern Pact. Now, the Comintern was a communist organization. And, you see the comment right in there. And that was the spreading of the revolution around the world. Japan attacks China. The rape of Nanking it was called the rape of Nanking then. Now it's known as the rape of Nanjing. I do not believe I talked about it. It contains the most horrific stories I've ever told as a history teacher. They did stuff the Mongols and probably the Nazis would not have done. 1938, Germany under Hitler has the Anschluss. That's the annexation of Austria. And remember, we talked about this way back when these two, Kleindeutsch, there's this word, Kleindeutsch, I can't remember the other one. When people wanted to unify Germany, there were two plans. A greater Germany with all the Germans in one country, and a smaller Germany that doesn't contain Austria. And so Bismarck did the smaller German unification. Hitler does the larger. And of course, he was born in Austria. They gave in to him. And then, so the Sudetenland is this small slice of Czechoslovakia with a lot of Germans. And so what happens is the British and French leaders fly to Munich, which is a sign of weakness when you fly to the bad guy's country. They flew into Munich to meet with him. And they basically, he said, if you let me have the Sudetenland, I promise not to take anything else. And of course, he's lying. They agree. Chamberlain comes back to England. He's the prime minister, and he says, we have peace in our time. He gets a standing ovation. Boy, do I wish I could quote Churchill exactly. Churchill is kind of out of power now. And he has this famous quote, and he's something like, he goes, these fools think they have chosen peace and honor. What they will get is dishonor and war. That's not an exact quote, but it's pretty close. Because everyone, has realized what's going on. Later in 1939, Hitler seizes the rest of Czechoslovakia. And this is when, for the first time, Hitler has seized land that does not have Germans in it. And so he not only violated his promise at the Munich conference, and remember the Munich conference or the Munich syndrome is synonymous with appeasement. The British finally tell the Poles, if he attacks you, we will come to help you. And so Germany doesn't want another two-front war, so they sign a non-aggression pact with Stalin. And then once they've done that, I told you guys the whole world says 3 words, oh my God. And then they say more words, here we go again. Germany invades Poland, thinking once again that the British and the French will back down. And this is the beginning of World War II in Europe. All right, so the Germans wait, let's see, they invade Poland. And remember, they take half of Poland. 6 weeks after the hostilities cease, the Russians invade the other half. That was the secret protocol of the Treaty of Munich. I'm trying to go too fast here. The Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact. So Hitler, the British and the French have declared war on him. So he waits 9 months. And he doesn't want, his goal is, of course, to attack the Soviet Union. That's been his goal ever since he wrote Mein Kampf. But he doesn't want to leave undefeated enemy in his rear. If you remember, one day I did the whole war in like 30 minutes. So he waits, and then he invades France. He does what the Schlieffen Plan cannot do. He conquers France. The British army gets off the beaches and goes back to England at Dunkirk. Good movie for you to watch there. The Russians invade, the Germans then invade Russia. And they do well for a while, but Russia is too big. And eventually that falters. The Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. That brings the U.S. into the war against Japan. Hitler impulsively declares war on America. Hitler is so stupid. By the end, he's kind of like Robespierre. His mind is gone. And he's just spouting utter nonsense. When the Americans landed at D-Day, which is a sure sign that, you're about to get your butt kicked. He told people, says, I'm glad the Americans are here because now we can get at them. That's just a sign of someone who's lost contact with reality. The U.S. has victories in the Pacific, Allied victories. The Italians had invaded North Africa, managed to get beat by the remnants of the British Army down there. So Hitler sends in his star tank general, Erwin Rommel, and he does well. The Americans go down there and push Rommel out along with the British. They come up into Italy. Boy, trying to go through World War II in a hurry is just hurts my historical sensibilities. Anyway, now they start massive bombing of German cities, and we have these things called firebombing. We firebombed Dresden, and there's another city we firebombed. Eventually, D-Day, we land on the beaches at Normandy, and Germany eventually surrenders. We drop 2 atomic bombs on Japan. Japan surrenders. We had not told Stalin we'd invented this bomb. There's three theories about why we dropped this bomb. Number 1, the one I buy, is it was punishment for Pearl Harbor. Number 2 was to save American lives. We could have invaded and lost maybe 1 million men, or we could use this bomb, kill a lot of Japanese. But in the long run, less Japanese and less Americans will die by doing this. That's what many servicemen believe. Historians favor the third theory about why we dropped it, to scare the Russians. Hey, Stalin, look what we got that you ain't got. All right, so I want you just to pause this and write this down. There's the 3 conferences. Tehran was first, then Yalta, then Potsdam. And there's all these disagreements, and I don't really have enough time to go over all of them tonight. But remember that the big argument between Stalin and them is, what are you going to do with Eastern Europe, right? And Stalin basically hints that he will allow free elections. But by the time you get to at Yalta, at the time you get to Potsdam, Stalin has already taken over Poland. And you see on the right here, Truman's angry because now FDR has died and Truman is there. And Truman's, pretty pissed. He's like, hey, you're supposed to have these free elections, and Stalin's not going to budge because he's got it. And we'll go over the differing perspectives here. All right, Cold War. Here you go as far as perspectives. We don't trust the Russians. We say they've lied about everything. In 1946, they clamped down all across Eastern Europe. Winston Churchill, who basically, in my opinion, helps England win the war. In my opinion, he's the most important person of the 20th century. I don't care who that pisses off. I just think he is. He's the one that kept us in the game, kept everybody in the game. He kept the game going while the Americans weren't even in it. Well, once he wins, they win the war. We help them win the war. He gets kicked out of office, the vagaries of the British electoral system. And he's got nothing to do, and he goes around making speeches. He makes a speech in Joplin, Missouri, and Churchill is always good with a colorful phrase. And he makes his speech, and I've heard it. You probably heard it in A Push. He's just got this. It's a bad recording, but he says, from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste or whatever, an iron curtain has fallen over Eastern Europe. And the term sticks, and that's what you see here on the left. Here you see Churchill peeking under this curtain, and what you see on the other side, you see that interrupted railroad. They have just shut off Eastern Europe. And they didn't build a wall all the way down. The wall was in Berlin, and it wasn't built to the 60s. But the term Iron Curtain refers to Soviet control of Eastern Europe. Soviet point of view, the democracies don't like them. I don't know if I told you this in class. Well, you see here about the Western Front too late. He wanted us to invade in 42 or 43. Do D-Day then, we said we weren't ready. So he says, well, you Americans waited so that Hitler could kill more Russians, and I don't think that's true, but, maybe it was. Who knows? I'm not old enough to have been there. Lend-Lease is terminated. He wants a buffer zone. So that's the big thing. He says, listen, I need these countries because we fought the Germans in World War I. We fought them in World War II. We ain't going to fight them again. All right, I'm going to stop video number 2 here.